Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Thanks for taking the time to watch. So with a video I put up recently about using a honing guide to sharpen, there was a question on there about using narrow chisels and maybe some difficulties about getting the best results possible. So with that, what I would suggest is how much are we concerned about all the different variables? I think something was raised with the thicknesses on the edges of the chisel. A lot of people refer to these as the lands. These are obviously the cheap set, and I'll do a review on these in due course, but these are really slab-sided. You know, they're very robust on the edges. They're not particularly fine. You can compare that to the Narex, which come down to a very slim edge all the way down through. Or you could compare it to dump chisel, which I got from a dump, which is thicker and then begins to taper down. And that's something which is characteristic also with these vintage ones that I pick up. Thicker and then tapering down. So let's sort of just put those into the jig and see if there are any problems. Now I did want to use the 1/4 inch version of this cheap chisel, but there is a defect with it and it prevents it actually being put into the jig properly. But here, this is where you want to look, is down in through there. Is it referencing underneath that jaw properly? Yes it is. And down in through there, is it referencing underneath that jaw properly? And in both cases, it is. Don't bother looking in there too much. As long as it's going to be clamped and secure, you're going to be okay. The next thing to think about is probably how much pressure is being applied. When it's introduced to the stones that we'll look at in a moment, I would only want to just add light pressure, feel where that bevel is, get it balanced, and then just gently pull it back. Because you're going to be working with narrow chisels, it's not going to take a great deal of effort to raise a burr. And don't feel too, upset with yourself if you're not getting a great edge off of a narrow chisel straight away. Number one, there's a bit less resistance, so they're not having to cut through as much material. But also, your average video you watch online, people go for the Hollywood stuff, which is take a wider chisel, and sharpening a wide chisel is a piece of cake. It's not difficult, so it's not surprising most people are demoing on that, because sharpening a narrow chisel doesn't look that interesting. Now flipping straight to the Narex, that feels really positive in the jig, because like I think the commenter on the video had pointed out, because the Narex has got very thin sides, it really fits into the slots here particularly well. It doesn't do that quite as well on the wide-sided one, but it's still nice and parallel under there, nice fit, so that's going to work well. So yeah, you can say that a very thin-sided chisel is going to work a bit better in one of these jigs, that's for certain. Then we've got the dump chisel, see how that one plays out. Again, I'm a bit clumsy with a jig because it's not my preferred method. Again, dump chisel is fine. Again, I only call it dump chisel because that's where I found it. But it's in there nice and neat, no problems. And again, it fits pretty well into the slots because it's got a bit more of a bevel. And again, just to highlight the challenges with the jig is also, you're never going to be able to do everything with a jig. You know, no matter how many clever jaws and add-ons and all the bits and pieces that come with it. My narrow chisels here, I can't really get the projection on them because they're too short. But fortunately, I can freehand hone and I'm happy with the outcomes that I get. So it's not a problem to use that. So let's take a look at introducing that to the stone and see if we can get a nice consistent sharpening bevel on it. Got the projection of the chisel set with the stop and got a bit of oil on the stone. And like I was saying in the video, if I just carefully shimmy around, then all I'd be looking to do is to get there and to put the pressure just behind that edge. Hopefully you can see it. I'll move the camera around a couple of times. You can put a couple of fingers there if you can cope and just lightly draw it back. With your wider chisels, you can probably push forward as well, but I think when something's so narrow, it is going to be a lot trickier to do that. So I would just go for that gentle pulling motion. Again, don't try and white knuckle it, let the abrasive do the work and see where you end up. Just about got a burr there, so that does the job. That natural stone cuts a little bit slower than the Norton. See if we can go forward and back a little bit. I think if I did want to go forward, I don't think I'd want to go for the big long strokes on it. Boy. I'm just going to skimmy this round a bit so we can see if that's a bit better. Yeah, it's a bit better. Okay, let's see where we are. So you guys who use your honing guides all the time are going to be much more competent than me. There's slightly lopsided secondary bevel, but again, I've said before, you shouldn't worry about that. I can feel a burr on the back. That seems pretty good. Just chase that one off. We'll test that one in just a second. And then we'll go down to a 1/4 inch chisel. And I haven't even used my Narex yet, so be an interesting one to use. And then I'll show in the second video in just a second what I would go for myself. Again, with that 1/4 inch one there, it probably feels like comfortable to go for maybe one finger. Yeah, and just relaxing into it, it feels that maybe not just a backward stroke but forward and back with light pressure, but just working in a small area. You can see I'm probably concentrating most of my efforts here towards the end of the stone rather than using it to hollow out the middle. You know, you bought your whole stone, so use all of it. Just like when you buy a saw, you buy the whole saw, you use the whole length of it, not just the middle of the saw. So think about how you use your various tools. Again, there's a secondary bevel on that, more than generous. Could have stopped well ahead of time. So yeah, that's okay. We can move those over and do a little test. And remember, with all this lark, it's very easy to watch a few videos and to think how easy it should be to sharpen a chisel, or how my edges should look like, or how polished they should be. The reality is, most people, especially professionals, a lot of the chisel edges, you know, the bevels don't look necessarily that pretty, but where the rubber hits the road, they're usually nice and sharp, and that's all that's really important. So yeah, it's just, again, walnut's pretty easy working wood, so it's no problem. All nice and easy. All pretty straightforward. And all nice and clean. So yeah, it's very difficult. I think when you do use a jig, when you choose to use a jig, there's always going to be some limitations, and I'm not sure I've got any easy answers. It's just going to be practice. There are very few easy answers in woodworking, let alone life. So bit of practice, I guess, and see how you go.